Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the first of three weekly Global Citizen workshops sponsored by the Office of International Services at GSU in conjunction with the Global Studies minor and the Social Justice Initiative. We're very happy to start this session with two very knowledgeable individuals, Dr. Eliot Fackler, Assistant Professor of History, and Dr. Phyllis West, Director of Social Justice Initiatives. Thank you both for being part of this conversation today. I will now pass it to Dr. West to introduce the topic of today's workshop.
Hi, everybody. We are beyond excited to meet with you today and have this dialogue with you about what does it mean to be a global citizen. Ellie and I have had the honor of sitting down and having some conversation about it, but we're really just going to have a really open conversation with you about global citizenship and our role in this world, that world being locally and globally. All right, Elliot, take it from here. Are you going to introduce us, Amy?
I can just jump in.
Okay, wonderful.
I think Amy's provided a solid enough introduction. I think the maybe loose agenda for today will be to define what global citizenship is and consider why global citizenship might be important. We'll explore perhaps the ethical responsibilities of global citizenship and then discuss, as Dr. West said, how we might live globally on a local level. So I'll offer a few framing comments and some definitions maybe to get us thinking about the topic. For the past half a millennium or so, human cultures across the globe have been linked by the circulation of ideas, beliefs, practices, and technologies, by trade, by economic integration, the spread of epidemic diseases, and by acts of both unspeakable violence and inspiring cooperation. And thanks in part to modern inventions as wide-ranging as the shipping container, air travel, pipelines, and the internet, the world is now more interconnected than ever before. Of course, crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the looming threat of human-caused climate change, worldwide social movements for human rights, wave after wave of migration, and continuous international trade drive home the fact that political borders and even national identities are far more porous and less stable than we might imagine. So in light of these trends, is it fair to say that we're all global citizens, whether we like it or not? Maybe, I think, but while we may all be affected by occurrences elsewhere in the world, and while we might all have an impact on a world beyond our community or our nation, truly being a global citizen might require a more active decision to become engaged with and mindful of a world beyond our daily experiences. So let's consider some commonly accepted definitions of global citizenship. According to the United Nations, global citizenship is the, quote, umbrella term for social, political, environmental, and economic actions of globally minded individuals and communities on a worldwide scale. The term can refer to the belief that individuals are members of multiple, diverse, local and non-local networks rather than single actors affecting isolated societies. The aid organization Oxfam offers a similar definition. Global citizen is, quote, someone who is aware of and understands the wider world and their place in it. They take an active role in their community and work with others to make our planet more peaceful, sustainable, and fairer. And the Global Citizens Initiative describes a global citizen as, quote, someone who sees himself or herself as being part of an emerging world community and whose actions help define this community's values and practices. So I think that these definitions suggest that global citizenship requires individuals to recognize their place in the larger world and critically commit themselves to doing something that makes the world a more just and livable place. What kinds of actions do these definitions of global citizenship suggest we take to improve the world? It's perhaps the most significant question we'll examine over the next couple of weeks, and one that doesn't have a single answer or even necessarily an easy or straightforward answer. But before we get to that central question, perhaps we can explore some general reasons why we might want to become global citizens in the first place. And maybe Dr. West can share some of her experiences as a global citizen and her motivations for engaging in global citizenship throughout her life.
Thank you, Eliot. I would start, Eliot, with this conversation, and please call me Phyllis. I would start with this conversation about global citizenship, and what it means to me is just seeing myself in the world with others and seeing through their eyes, their experiences, my own, but in the context of just universal experiences. Who are people? What's their story? What are their experiences? I've been traveling out of the country since I was 23 years old. And what I noticed is that the same thing abroad or even at Governor State University, when you ask someone that you want to know something about them, you want to learn about them, you want to understand their culture, people are usually welcoming and excited that you want to know something about them. In short, just that peak of interest in another human being, what it says is, wow, you see me. You're curious about me. You're curious about my country, my culture, my community. And what it means to be a global citizen overall to me is just the kindness that it takes to learn about another, kindness and consideration it takes to learn about another individual, and to be willing to step outside of yourself to see someone else's journey. What about you?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think not much of a world traveler myself, at least not yet. But my experiences working on global peace and justice initiatives when I was employed at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies suggests just that a kind of curiosity for understanding how other people live their lives, and a general recognition of a common humanity, trite though this may sound, was kind of central to the mission of most global peace and justice initiatives that we worked on at the Kroc Institute.
Okay. What are some of the ones that you worked on at the Kroc Institute?
Yeah, at the Kroc Institute, I was fortunate to get the job, but I think that Governor State students can pursue career paths such as that one. I was involved in mainly looking at and researching international policy. So the work I did was akin to work one might do at a think tank. I did research on the effectiveness of targeted international sanctions, as well as nuclear non-proliferation, and then the relationship between civil society organizations and the armed forces, specifically in Afghanistan. And those were tough conversations. I think that when one engages in this kind of global citizenship, when you imagine your role to extend beyond that of your locality or your nation, you find yourself in difficult conversations. And certainly I had conversations that were really tough, speaking to colleagues who, for instance, were from Iraq and had been displaced and came to the United States because of the actions of my government, and then turning around and having conversations with Army Rangers who were about to deploy for Afghanistan, and finding that we had different ideas of what, if anything, the United States should be doing in Afghanistan. Those were always difficult conversations. And I don't know that I ever had a conversation where we came to clear resolutions, but understanding other people's motivations and their values was really important for moving policy forward, and also for developing kind of a general sense of the struggles that other people face and how I might help to alleviate those struggles.
Okay. And you bring up a very good point when we talk about policy and the importance of policy. Right about now, we're experiencing a major issue and crisis in the world we know, with Russia and Ukraine. And I just want to step back, knowing that because it's international and they're hearing the policy word. I'll give them an example. And when I was in college, before I joined Peace Corps, I was in college at Payne College in Augusta, Georgia. And it was a very small school, probably about 500 people at that school. But we learned at that time about apartheid in South Africa. And we were asked to protest against apartheid in South Africa. And that's when we were educated about the conditions that were very different between white, colored, and what's considered, I don't know what the other part is, but African, right, the Africans in Africanas and the different labels. But the bottom line was the darker your skin, the discrepancy in that country and how you live, the disparity. And that created more of an interest for me. And so I joined Peace Corps and went to Sierra Leone and Liberia, West Africa. It was in those countries that I lived in actual village. And in the village, there was no running water, no electricity. And it was a day-to-day struggle just to live. However, people were happy in that they had a family, they had a community, and they still were striving for a better way to live. That is an example where I'm going with this around policy, is that two things. In order to get clean water, there are movements and ways in which our country can work with other countries. That's one way, right, of consideration. And how do the United Nations, how does our country help people have a better quality of life with other resources? Another thing was that the fact that it was a civil war, in which now we're looking at problems with people bombing other countries now. Those are policies and conditions. And what does it have to necessarily do with us here? Everything. It can impact how we live here, abroad, be it our gasoline prices, our food resources, but most of all, how does it affect us? Anytime someone is hurting all over the world, we hurt by seeing that deep pain. And to see someone be harmed, whether it's in Chicago, in Ukraine, or in Africa, is something that should be a concern to all of us.
That's wonderful. I wonder, we'll talk more about the Peace Corps in our third session, but I wonder if you can maybe talk for a minute about how you approached living amongst people from Sierra Leone and Liberia, cognizant of the fact that you don't want to be this crusading Westerner that comes in and tells people how to live their lives. How do you navigate that space of joining their community, becoming a part of it, helping to improve their lives, hopefully, without imposing your vision for their lives on them?
Well,
it's a big question, I know.
Well, it will go over a little, and we'll talk a lot more about that, about the Peace Corps aspect of it. The part of the Peace Corps training was that we took time to learn language, we took time to learn culture. And the one thing that we were well educated on as Americans is to understand that you are there to support and assist. and yet people in their own country are the experts and we're learning. So it's a cultural exchange. They're learning about who we are, but we're learning about who they are, and they teach us, right? And in the case of being the only person, I was the only American and the only Christian in a Muslim village, which meant pretty much I learned everything through their eyes. And they were curious enough to ask me. I tell people all the time, the best experience I've ever had as a Christian was in a Muslim village. That was my best Christmas ever. And that was because they were willing to learn what is it that you're celebrating? How do you celebrate it in America? This is what we do here. We're Muslims. This is how we do it. And that helped a great deal because once the people in the village I lived in saw that I was curious and I wanted to learn about their culture, they welcomed me in and they then saw me as their daughter. They saw this very young girl and like, what are you doing here without your parents? And they were willing to say, well, you're here to help us, so we're going to make sure we take care of you. And it was an exchange. And that was, again, that changed my entire life. It helped me to be open to other religions, to understand and respect. Didn't matter whether I was interested in becoming that or changing my life. I could still maintain my other values. And I think that's what being a global citizen teaches you. The more you learn about a stranger, the more you get excited about yourself as well, about your own culture, and know that two truths can exist in the same space, right? We learn that we can embrace our own culture and we can embrace someone else's culture without being a threat or any kind. So it just makes you open. But I learned, I think humility is the number one thing, and not telling people they're wrong based on your values, respecting someone else's values. Good question. I'm
Yeah,
curious about, go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, I think that's great. That strikes me as a critical lesson for everybody who intends to spend some time abroad to learn. And people will learn it in various ways, but probably those on the ground interactions are the best teacher of that kind of humility. Yeah, that's great.
I want to stay with that though, right? Because in this dialogue, oftentimes we think we have to go abroad. And I know I'm probably skipping over a little bit, but it's important to keep that where we are because oftentimes we think we have to go abroad to have this cultural exchange and this global exchange. And just work that Amy and I've done together, we've constantly said that Governor State is the United States and it's also the United Nations. There's so many cultures right here, the richness of it. And even with our neighbor, to be a global citizen is to be to acknowledge our neighbor. I'm curious about your experiences, right? I know you talked about doing your global work, yet you have had at Notre Dame or here experiences of being with others. And what do you consider when that's important when interacting with someone from various cultures?
Yeah, that's a great question. The majority of my experiences with people from other cultures have occurred right here in the United States, and the majority of those experiences have occurred in the Midwest. So I think that I have been fortunate to have opportunities to spend a lot of time on college campuses over the years, and college campuses are generally a great place to meet people from diverse backgrounds and kind of see the world through other people's eyes. Phyllis and I talked about this last week, but my college roommate was from Ghana, and I went to a small college, and there were at the time probably about half a dozen, maybe 10 students from Ghana on campus. And so at first they stuck together fairly closely. So I met all the students from Ghana, and one of the students, his first name was Peace Love, a hyphenated first name. And he explained to me when I first met him that his parents were hippies. And I thought, I thought this was kind of a United States phenomenon, the counterculture of the 1960s. And turns out it wasn't, right? He grew up in an English-speaking urban area in West Africa, and his parents had experiences that probably paralleled those of many people living through the counterculture in the United States. And my roommate himself was listening to the hip hop that was popular in the United States at the time, 20 years ago. And what I expected to find was cultural difference, and certainly there were differences, but the thing that struck me most was cultural overlap, time and again. And I think that has sort of persisted. Currently, I live in Berwyn, and most of my neighbors are Spanish speakers. And so, on a daily basis, my children are confronted with a culture that is very noticeably different from their own, and they're becoming comfortable existing in that space, not always quite understanding what other kids are saying, but kind of rolling with it and learning to be flexible, and hopefully picking up some language skills along the way. So I think, those interactions are extraordinarily common here. And at Governor State, students, staff, faculty, we can all pursue those kinds of interactions, right? Interactions that will unsettle you in some ways, make you step outside your comfort zone, but also reassure you in that they resonate with your own experiences.
That is so powerful. And sharing your testimony and the richness of your testimony, although it's just your story, is huge, Eliot, because the word I'm hearing and what you're saying, and I would love to engage our audience very soon, because I think this is a perfect time to engage them, as you just placed us in the most important place around global citizenship, and that's intentionality. The fact that you live in Berwyn, you had a choice of where you would live, and you chose to live in Berwyn, which means, especially in the Chicagoland area, Chicago has historically always has been known as, since the 1900s, early 1900s, as the most segregated city, one of the most segregated cities in the United States. And the fact that you positioned your family in a place where they will have cultural exchange on a daily basis is huge. Some of us don't have that unless we intentionally make that happen, right? In different locations, and just having that conversation. And that's the beauty of Governor State. Governor State has such an international community that we get to exchange. And Amy, I really feel this global luncheon coming on, where we could have more dialogue about different cultures that are within Governor State and celebrate the beauty of what we have. I often talk to students when I was teaching in social work and said, if you use this time as a student only to interact with people who look like you, you've just missed out on this amazing experience of what it means to be at a university, because you get to meet people all over the world, and they become your friends for a lifetime. And I just want to stop there. And that's the beauty about being a global citizen, is celebrating how beautiful this world is, because we are so very different.
Yeah, I think that is perhaps a good place to pause and maybe open up the conversation a little bit. I'm curious to know in what ways people see themselves as global citizens, how they hope to pursue global citizenship, what kinds of interactions they've had right here at home, and even, what more we can do as a campus community to promote global citizenship as a kind of practice, right? An intentional practice, as you say, something that we actively choose to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and if nothing else, please give us your thoughts. What's going on in your mind? And please, we like the popular and unpopular questions or comments. We welcome them.
This is not our lecture, if I may, and I apologize for not showing my face because they will definitely pause the screen will pause. But I really, first of all, I want to say that I really appreciate having this conversation. That's fantastic. And second, in my view, being a global citizenship is most of all, it means understanding and appreciating other cultures and developing the tolerance to differences. And very often we consider themselves very understanding, and at the same time, we don't act like this. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, when I first started teaching in JSU, we had a discussion about, I teach capstone and practicum. So we had a discussion about future jobs and career opportunities. And one student made a comment that it's harder and harder to get a job because there are too many foreigners here. And that's a common, no pun intended. But my knee-jerk reaction was, there was a class about 26 people. So I started asking students, first I asked students whose families came from Poland or originated from Poland, please stand up. And then I asked students whose families originated from Germany, and then from Mexico, and then from Eastern Europe, from Italy, and other countries. At the end of this little exercise, everybody was standing. And they just looked at each other and realized they're not Native Americans. And even Native Americans, they came through Bering Strait from Mongolia. So they were not originated from that place, yet they made this comment that all the jobs are going to, there are too many foreigners and all the jobs going there. And that's not the lack of sensitivity, but rather the lack of knowledge and understanding. And I think being in a university like JSU gives them an opportunity to see the world differently. And that's what it means to be a global citizen. And I will say a cliche, but they are cliches because it's so true. The world is shrinking. Everything is so much easier. 10 years ago, to make a phone call to a different country cost you about $2 a minute. Right now it's free, and you can have people can have video, and they can see in real life what's going on everywhere, including what's going on in Ukraine by using simple Twitter. So world is shrinking. If you don't recognize it, if you don't become part of it, we will be missing out, and we will be actually not part of this global village, global society. And that's why I think it's so important to have this conversation.
And Natalia, you bring up a really powerful point, right, in terms of how do we educate ourselves and others and have dialogues. So have a dialogue about our thoughts, our thoughts, our assumptions, and where did these assumptions come from, right? So in order to address what you said, that statement that was made, well, we can't get jobs here because foreigners are taking jobs away. That is powerful, right? In using that opportunity in that moment, what you did was that example of we're all immigrants unless you're indigenous, right? And to acknowledge the land we're on. And then now, especially in the classroom, we just opened up a moment in time, an opportunity to bring in history and understand where are these comments coming from? What's going on in our world? What is the pattern and the historical pattern of these comments, depending on what century you're in? Because every century, someone said that same comment in every century, and we need to be able to show them this pattern that we have towards othering people, right? The othering, the stranger, the person that doesn't look like, as the threat, and who benefits from that and who hurts from those comments. But it's really
That's a great
important,
point.
right? And it's really important as professors that we don't ignore those comments, but we use it as an opportunity to educate each other, to learn and understand where is it coming from, and then bring evidence and facts and historical facts of how can we address this? What does this look like? At the same time, right? What I heard underneath that, whoever said that as a student, I hear, okay, what is the pain? What is the pain underneath that, or the struggle that comes from that comment? And it could be, right, let's talk about that as well. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for sharing. We do have Cynthia Hudson here who would like to share.
Hi, everyone. This is a wonderful conversation, and I am just so glad to be a part of it and to just hear the dialogue. And when I sat down, I kind of jotted down some words and just some thoughts I had around global citizenship, because I believe we all are global citizens in where we are now in the world. We are not separated and isolated. And technology, as the previous speaker alluded to, technology has brought us so much closer together. And one of the things that I had written down, I usually take like copious notes on anything that I'm listening to. But traveling abroad has always been something that I wanted to do. Hasn't occurred yet, but it is coming. And so I think about how I might interact when I meet others of a different culture. Even though here in the US, I'm constantly in cultures other than my own. When I when I graduated from undergrad, I'm an employee, a staff member here at GSU. But when I was 22 years old, when I graduated college, and my first thing was, I need a job, and where am I going to work? And I just started filling out applications everywhere. Long story short, I found myself as a case manager with the Department of Human Services, Department of Public Assistance. And my job there, I worked with single moms, divorced moms, widow, single mothers, low-income families. And I learned so much. You talk about a culture within a culture. That is what I experienced. And one of the greatest things that I learned was, regardless of economics and neighborhoods, moms usually want the best for their children. And that was one of the greatest lessons that I learned. And what was so ironic, going into social services was never something that I envisioned for myself, but I know now where I am in my life that those lessons and what I got there was to impact where I am now, because my mindset and what I learned about working with those women and women, period, it has served me today. And so, again, as a global citizen, or as a As we look at culture, I believe there is more cultural overlap than there is the differences among us. Sometimes it's easiest to focus on those differences because our emotions allow us to, as Dr. West said, to others, and that is an easy route to go. But to really sit back and accept and look at our similarities and our overlap, I believe that is greater. I believe it's more prominent. I believe it's the greater thought, for a better way of putting it. But thank you so much for just listening to me. I am truly enjoying this conversation, and this is good.
Thanks for sharing, Cynthia. That's great. And you highlight one thing that became really apparent to me when I started working in international peace studies was that the struggles that women and mothers and caregivers generally experience, and that we're familiar with here at home, they're shared by people around the world, right? That you're absolutely right. Those experiences are resonant, and the fundamental driving forces that make, I think, most people get up in the morning are, the well-being of their loved ones, right? That's something that we can all understand.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Next, we have Latrice Koger, who would like to share.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to keep my comment kind of brief because I know we don't have unlimited time here. But I just wanted to say I consider myself to be a global citizen. I started traveling when I was 13 years old with my mom. My mom and dad were avid travelers. So by the time I was 21, I had visited 6 countries. At this point, I have visited every continent except for Antarctica. But back to something Dr. West said, I became interested in traveling and becoming a global, well, I didn't call it a global citizen at the time, was I joined my church when I was in 6th grade, Trinity United Church of Christ. And there was a sign in our lawn that said, "Stop Apartheid, Free South Africa." And I'm like, "Mommy, what is this about?" And so in our church, we would talk a lot about that. So I said, wow, this is something I want to be interested in. So the first time I went to Africa, I went with my church. And it was a missionary mission. It wasn't just a vacation. It wasn't a trip. And I was in the 8th grade at that time. And so I said, I want to see more of the world. And I want to see. And so I think traveling so young, I began to think about my values and what's important to me as I see other places. So as I became an adult, I visited Dominican Republic, and I was able to see the dichotomies between light-skinned and dark-skinned people and how horribly Haitians were treated as opposed to the Dominican Republicans. And so we were on vacation, and I'm telling my friends this, and they're like, "Oh, you're being a Debbie Downer. We're not here for that." And I'm like, "Well, see, because you are a global citizen, you notice things like that, and it helps you understand the world not only through your own eyes, but through other people's eyes, and it just helps you with your own understanding of world events." Thank you, guys.
Latrice,
Yes,
are you there?
I am here.
I was sitting here and you almost had me in tears.
Oh,
Because it was my return from Sierra Leone after I was evacuated from Sierra Leone, and I was completely lost when I came back from Chicago. I came back, right? I was lost. I didn't feel like home was home anymore. And I was like, where do I belong in Chicago? Where do I belong? And I saw this amazing sign, Latrice, that said "Stop Apartheid" on 95th Street.
yes.
And I joined Trinity because I saw that sign. And I said, clearly, they know about global
Yes.
issues and they're concerned. And that's how I joined. I just wanted to share that with you because as much as we've crossed paths, we've never had that conversation. But it was that concern about international life in South Africa and justice, and what is it about people with darker skin who struggle that made me want to push even more. So I thank you, and the definitely the consideration of the DR and Haiti, and how is it possible that they share the same land yet the injustice right
Absolutely.
is very different from these two places that share the same land. What's going on with that? So good point and incredible travels. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Who's next?
I'm looking here. Oh, Virgil.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to make a comment, please. I'm an IFDI grad student at Governor State, and I'm a military veteran as well. And once I got out of the military, I went to work overseas, and I worked in Belgium, I worked in Liberia for several years, in Afghanistan for several years, as well as Kenya, Uganda. So, like Latrice, I've been to pretty much every continent except Antarctica as well. And as an IFDI student and as a traveler and military veteran, I would say that for me, what stood out about traveling was two things mainly. Was everywhere I went, everyone spoke English, plus their own native language. And I joke with friends of mine. Uh, I said it as a joke, but it is actually kind of true that when I was living in those villages, like Dr. West, when I was living in those villages in Liberia, in the middle of the rainforest, where you're taking your shower out of a bucket.
Yes.
There's no warm water. When I talk to people, uh, the person who spoke two languages, that usually was the unemployed person. It was very common for people to speak three, four, five languages fluently. And I just find it kind of strange that as Americans, we don't do that, even though we have the infrastructure, we have the educational system to make that happen. But as uh, as a mass, as a country, we seem to fight against that, and I think that's quite unfortunate in when it comes to connecting us with the rest of the world, but also from a more media perspective, in all of those countries as well, you can get any American television show you want. They're of course they will be on bootleg DVDs or whatever, but you don't. We don't get foreign media the way they pick up on American media. And as a grad film student, I would say as a country, we don't export the best image of ourselves. And I think that also is very unfortunate. But I think to me, when I was in the military, um, I, during the second Gulf War, I deployed, and what I noticed was we weren't able to talk to local media. So in Saudi Arabia, we didn't have any, our public affairs office, who is in charge of talking with local populations and local media. We couldn't talk to local Saudi media or French media or German media for that matter, unless they spoke English. So if we got a journalist who didn't understand English, then we were pretty much stuck. But I think ultimately the solution to all of these issues is we got to start educating our children at a much younger age
Yes.
to learn and know about the rest of the world. I mean, it's not a mistake that most Americans can't tell you who the Prime Minister of Canada is, and they are our friend, and they're right next door. Um, but I think we just need to start at a very very much younger age. Everyone on this conversation is either an undergrad or a grad student or some form of intellectual, but we need to push that to the regular guy on the street, and that's how I think we will see dividends pay off. That's all I got. Sorry that was so long-winded.
That's great. Yeah, I'm 100% behind you. I think that ought to be one of our critical missions as a society, for sure. Well said, Virgil.
Thank you,
Yes.
Virgil. Thank you, Virgil. So we have a few comments in the chat from Dr. Harris. I think that the concept of global citizenship also means having meaningful reflection on how interconnected the world is. And the choices we make here impact the world, including the choice to remain uninformed. So that goes in line with what we just talked about. We also have a comment from Michelle. Knowing people aren't so different after all. Coming together to learn new things, culture, language, ways of living. First-hand experience is better than reading from a textbook. Textbook can only tell you so much. Wanting a greater understanding than what is portrayed by others, whether it's bias or incorrect.
Good point.
Yes.
What can we do at GSU to really continue this love that we have? I am just totally, my heart is filled listening to the comments. I mean, the comments to me is better than Eliot. I love us. I really like you and the two of us talking, but the engaging, especially in the midst of COVID, we're on films. Like we usually, if we were in our, what is our favorite hall? That Ingerson is usually our hall of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sitting there having this dialogue. Well, this is our pretend Ingerson, and we're having this moment in time. I'm just impressed with the people who are making the comments about what it means to be a global citizen, and the fact that we are invested in global citizenship and living it right here on campus. That's so hearing you speak it, Cynthia, Crystal, Latrice, Virgil, keep it coming, because it's moving to hear that this is also what we welcome. And I'm curious about if anybody wants to address local global citizenship, and in terms of your neighbor next door, right? Every time we take students abroad to Panama, Nicaragua, and then to Ghana, we'll say to them, we're doing this here. We're a community, we're a family, we're a GSU family when we travel abroad, but when you get home, how are you going to live it with your next door neighbor? How do we do this at home? Anybody in the audience wants to comment on that?
We do have Karen Blackman who had her hand raised, so I'll pass it to you, Karen.
Hey there.
Hey, Karen.
There's so many ways you can do it at home, but before I answer that, I think it's also important to understand why people are not involved. I think the biggest challenge is that Americans don't know how to get out of their own way. We don't understand citizenship because we've been bred to believe that America is the end all be all of everything that is there. And when we travel to other countries, we look for the American version of what's in that country instead of looking for the uniqueness and the beauty of their country. It's so funny when you go to different countries and you see people in McDonald's. And McDonald's is different in other countries. Yes, there's a different option in India. There's a different option of burgers in Italy. There are differences, but Americans know how to be tourists. They don't know how to be travelers or citizens. When it comes to visiting other countries, I think that's sometimes it. We have a very distinct way of trying to Americanize when we travel. I think the kindest thing you can do is learn how to say hello in someone's native language when you go to their country. to be respectful of their country. Because as you learn how to respect these are things you can bring back to America to teach your neighbors. And until people learn how to do that, I think that's some of the challenges that we face. Um, I have friends of all nationalities. I live in a mostly African American community, but I do go to other restaurants that are indigenous to another country. So I may go to an Italian restaurant, I may go to an Indian restaurant or a Pakistani restaurant or a Hispanic or a Cuban. And then when I go to those restaurants, I love to compare what I experience in a native country to what I'm experiencing in Chicago. And this connectivity that we have is something that is so important. Another thing, as I think Dr. West and Amy and our host stated, we need to start our children traveling at a younger age. That is so key. That introduction to a different culture by a parent, I think, introduces global citizenry into a mindset so they become accustomed to it. When you'd be amazed at how many people, especially Americans, they say, I'm gonna wait till I retire to travel. It's such a common thing. I'm gonna wait till I retire to travel. When you're traveling to Italy, you see small children, families with small children, like 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds going for holiday. They have understood that the family unit and exposing them to these cultural activities is pivotal. It is the additional part of education. Europeans view it as part of their lifestyle and not an exception. We view travel as an exception and not a lifestyle. And it's just changing your thought process and accepting the things that make us different is what makes us the same. Finding the commonality and expressing those things are so critical to understanding the beauty of travel. It's something that we always talk about America. And, when 4th of July comes around, it's so funny. Talk about 4th of July. We're 200 years old. I've been in buildings that are 3,000 years old. I've been in buildings I went to a monastery in Civitavecchia in Italy that was 3,000 years old. So when you talk about celebrating 200, you're like, we're still babies when it comes to this beautiful world. And understanding and appreciating the beauty of it, it's the elegance. I tell people all the time, the sunrise in Italy is different than the sunrise in India, which is different from the sunrise in Costa Rica. It's still beautiful. It's still beautiful. That's it. I'm sorry. That's all I got.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I did see Shakina Miller has her hand raised here, so I wanted to give her a moment to share.
Hi, sorry, I'm not cutting my camera on. I'm actively getting my hair redone, and that is not something y'all need to see. So I wanted to say that, so even though I served in the military and I've traveled abroad a handful of times, what I've tried to do in my work as a social worker is I've actively worked at places that it was part of their mission to serve the BIPOC community. I just went into private practice, and at this particular practice, everyone on our staff, all of our clinicians are women, which is fantastic, but we're all members of the BIPOC and immigrant community, including Pakistani. We have a woman on staff that's from Egypt, and all these areas in Southeast Asia, and we serve predominantly members of the BIPOC community who don't normally have, or who have traditionally not have access to adequate mental health services, right? And so we lean on each other to provide these services for these communities that are outside of our own. And we learn from each other, we work with each other, and we grow with each other. And it's been this amazing experience that I can have in my community because I don't always get get the ability to travel abroad and provide services. And that's what I wanted to say.
Well, first, welcome home, Shakina. She is a GSU alum. It's so nice to have you on screen with us. I love it. Did we lose her?
I'm here. I'm so excited to be back with you guys. I love you guys so much.
Okay, Shakina went to Panama with us?
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua. Oh my gosh, Nicaragua is the best time ever. I'll travel with you any day.
Yeah,
I love you.
speaking of Nicaragua, you know, as Karen Blackman was talking about how, you know, us as U.S. citizens may feel like we're in the best country ever. I mean, there are many, many benefits to living in the U.S., but you know, one thing that really impacted me when I was in Nicaragua working with the communities there that live in rural areas that have nothing. I mean, each family member has one pair of shoes. They don't have a floor, they don't have access to water, but yet they are so joyful. And there's this joy that you'll find as you travel in, you know, other parts of the world where maybe they don't have as many material things. They don't need the material things to have that joy. And so, you know, in a very small comparison, you know, yes, we're very privileged in the US and we have access to a lot of things, but sometimes we're lacking that joy that can be found without all of the things that we don't need.
You have comments in the chat, Amy.
Oh, thank you. All right, so let's see here. Well, there's a few comments. Let's see. An event with food that represents cultures and relevant conversation would be great as an idea at GSU. This conversation gives a sense of hope. We are on our way as Americans. Let's see here.
Hey, Amy,
Oh,
can I
yes.
add one thing?
Sure.
With that, the comment about the event with food, I think that's a wonderful idea. But I would add just a little bit to that and make it a passport drive or just some kind of informative session on how to apply for passports, because it's amazing to me that most Americans don't own passports. So I don't think we'll ever be true citizens of the world if we're not able to get on a plane and go somewhere.
Thank you. Yes, we did actually have a passport event in the fall, but we hope to do that again. So maybe we can kind of combine it all with the food.
Great.
And I want to really emphasize the having had the pleasure to spend a summer on the Navajo Nation, and that experience with our indigenous brothers and sisters was also transformative. And I say that to reiterate of how many transformative experiences can we also have locally, right? To make this traveling abroad, although many more of us are doing it now, it's still very expensive. And once again, next door, we both in, right? So how do we also remember and think about our different cultures right here, especially our indigenous cultures?
That's great. And before we end, I know we're out of time now. Just as a reminder to everybody, next week there will be same time, same place, another session in which Dr. Natalia Rector is going to be talking about Fulbright opportunities and her experiences with Fulbright. And then in 2 weeks, Phyllis will be back to talk about Peace Corps. So we'll talk about concrete ways to actually travel abroad, and maybe throughout those conversations, we'll also talk about ways to engage in global citizenship close to home as well.
Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone. I wish we had more time, but we will need to close up for today. And we really hope that you join us on the next sessions.
I think they're telling you, you're going to have to continue this global series throughout the year. That's what I hear in those. I'm reading those comments.
Absolutely. Good.
Absolutely. Goodbye, and thank you guys so much for this time in this space.
Thank you, Latrice.
Thanks, everybody.
See you. Take care.
Bye.